Our next set of tools are our snap multiply tools, and these are extremely powerful and very cool tools, and definitely give the initial Lightwave tools a little run for their money. Let's go ahead and just create a simple box, and I'm going to make this more of a flat box just to start out with. And we're going to go to the vector clone first. I'm going to open up our numeric options, and we can see the main feature that we want to be taking a look at is our count once we draw up our initial lines. So I'm going to start out just by selecting our bottom endpoint, and then what we can do is define where we want to clone this to by using our snapping options. So if I wanted to, I could snap it just to the top, and then if we change our count, we end up increasing the amount of copies that we make. This is a great tool for creating buildings mainly, although it can be used for lots of other things. It's definitely something that's extremely powerful for creating skyscrapers and very tall buildings, because you can create one floor and then easily just create your additional floors from your initial floor just by using these options. And you can see as I drag off, we have the separation between all of our different count numbers and all of our different clones. This is also a great way to make stairs. See, we just give a little bit of an offset. Of course, we could always snap that first and then use our numeric panel to give us our offset, and that way we make sure that all of our objects are on top of each other. And of course, what we might want to do is knife that off and delete the end on the right side just to get more of an even staircase. But overall, it's a pretty straightforward tool and can be used for a lot of different things. We can also set to show our X, Y, and Z, and that way while we're within our panels we can see a little bit better of which direction that it is we're moving to and which way we're snapping, because I could easily move this to the side as well, and that way if we take a look at the top view, we can see all of our different clones going off onto our x-axis. So I'm going to hit the spacebar to end the tool, Control Z just to undo that, and let's take a look at our array clone. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just create a smaller object, or I can just use H on the keyboard for our stretching tool, just to modify this and make it a little bit smaller. Because once we get into the higher numbers of clones, we're going to get a lot of polygons. So I'm going to go to our array clone, hit the numeric. You can see we have a couple of different options now from our vector clone. And instead of just having one count, we now have a count for all of our different axes. So let's start out by selecting one of our points. And currently our count is only set to 1 right now, so what I want to do is increase our X count, and we can increase our Y count, and our Z as well. And because I'm snapped to the end, there's no spacing in between all of these objects. But if I wanted to, I could just pull out each of these different points. We can also set to show our distance, and that way we can be a little more specific about what it is we're creating and the distances between all of our objects. But what I could easily do is just increase these numbers quite a bit to give us a large amount of clones. Although keep in mind, once you get into the higher numbers, it will decrease your performance because you are showing a lot more polygons in the scene, which is one of the reasons why I'm just using a box to show this. Because if I was using more of a higher detailed mesh and cloning this many copies, I might not get the same sort of system speed that I'm getting right now. But overall, it's a pretty straightforward tool. Works like the other one, except that we have the ability to clone on all of our different axes. It also works with all the snapping tools, just like everything else does. And overall, it's an extremely powerful tool, and something you might want to just override your keyboard shortcuts for and start using the LWCAD options instead of your Lightwave ones, because it's definitely a lot easier to clone things within LWCAD than it is with a lot of the native tools. So I'm just going to undo this, hit A on the keyboard just to bring that into view, just kind of reposition. And our next is a rail clone. And if I go ahead and select this, you can see that it says error, no rail or curve or object. And that's because the rail clone is similar to the native Lightwave rail clone where we need a curve in the background. So we are going to switch to another layer, and I'm just going to put our box in the background for right now. And one thing to keep in mind is that this rail clone will only work with LWCAD curves. So we want to make sure that we're using all of the tools available within the primitive section, or the primitives too, for some of our other options. Or what we can do is just convert curves that we've created with native Lightwave curves, and then we can just convert these to LW curves if we wanted to. What I'm going to do is just, first I'm going to use a circle. I'm just going to pull that out. Click the spacebar. I'm going to hit T to move, and just move that up to center it. And I'm just going to swap layers. And now if we go back to our LWCAD Extended tab, we're going to select our rail clone, and then what we want to do is select our object, and we can start drawing out the distance along our curve. Moving this basically to the center is going to give us a very straight clone around this circle that we have. If we open up the numeric, you can see we have a couple of different options. We can turn oriented on or off. So whether or not we want it to rotate its position along with the curve, or whether or not we want it to stay in exactly the same place. And then we can adjust our count and how many objects we are creating. And we can do this with a variety of different curves. So I'm going to hit the spacebar, undo, go back to our other layer, and just delete it. And let's go back to the regular LWCAD tab. And we can select a pattern 2D. We'll just move this out. We'll swap our layers. Go back to the LWCAD Extended tab. Select our rail clone. And then we can use this object as well, or all of these different shapes that are available, to clone our objects as well. So if you're working at a building, what you can do is just select one of your curves that you have available. If you wanted to maybe create some clones around the ceiling of some objects, you can just select that curve. And another really nice thing is that we don't have to be on separate layers. I usually like to keep my controls that I have for my rails on a separate layer, but that doesn't mean you have to. What I'm going to do is just undo that, and I'm going to cut this shape from our second layer and paste it into our first layer. So they're now both on the exact same layer, and what I can do is select our object, and we're going to go back to our rail clone, and now we can use this object on this layer, pull in and out, and use this as our rail clone. So that separation is there if we need it to be, but otherwise we can just do this on the exact same layer, which is a huge advantage for when you're working with rail clones. And we could select whether or not we want it oriented. And it's a very simple and easy tool to use. So we'll go ahead and just delete that. And our last option is a mirror tool, which is also something I would suggest you overwrite your keyboard shortcut for, just because it is a lot better than the native Lightwave mirror tool, and the fact that we can do it on any rotation and we don't need to worry about the orientation of the object at all. So I'm going to create a new box, and I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this in an uneven manner. We're going to go back to our LWCAD Extended tab. We're going to select our mirror tool, and we're going to select our first point and our second, and now you can see we're mirroring based on these snapping points that we have set up, which is based on whatever we have in our snap panel. But what I can also do is just go ahead and select off of this and pretty much mirror it wherever I want. But a really nice thing is just being able to snap to that, so that way we don't have to worry about being on specific axes or specific angles of set degrees that are in the native Lightwave mirror tool. So we can pretty much do whatever we want. And I'm just going to undo this and actually give us a little bit of rotation on some of our other axes. And we'll go back to our mirror tool, and now in the perspective view I can set these values, and we can also see that we have 3 points now showing up to define exactly how we're going to be mirroring this, and that's because it is such an interesting and strange rotation, and the fact that it's not very oriented based on a specific degree. But that's one of the really, really nice things about this tool, is that we don't have to be on specific axes. We don't have to be at specifically 0 degrees in order to mirror an object now. We don't have to worry about rotating it back to a specific point or centering it. We can just do it however it is, and in the perspective view if needed, which is actually a little bit easier in the perspective view. I'd give you a little bit better of an idea of what it is that you're doing, especially if you have an object like this that's, contorted a little bit more than normal. Open up the numeric options, we can see that it's completely blank, so everything is set directly within whatever it is that we're selecting. And like I said, this is definitely something you're going to want to start using instead of the native Lightwave mirroring tool, just because it is so easy to use, and there's a lot less things to worry about when you're using it, because it'll definitely speed up your performance, and you don't need to worry about all those different aspects like I mentioned before. And in combination with all the other different tools, the entire Snap Multiply tab is just full of fantastic, amazing tools to increase your productivity.